Welcome to the Dear Higher Self podcast. We are back for another episode, and today we are talking all about the higher self because it is the Dear Higher Self podcast after all. So it only makes sense for one of our first few episodes to go farther down the rabbit hole of what your higher self is, what it means, how to work with it, and all the things. Because I think for some of us, if we've been on this spiritual self-development journey for a while, probably have some experience into what it is and how to work with it. But for those of us who are kind of new to this world and maybe have some questions around it, why not have a whole episode just unpacking it all and going down the rabbit hole? So let's just jump in. You ready?
Ready. Or I was going to say, if you're like me, somewhere in the middle, who's been on this path for a really long time, but just gets so confused in their own head about what to call certain things. I'm like, is it my higher self? Is it my intuition? Is it my inner child? Like, what are all these different terms? And I feel like sometimes that in and of itself confuses me. So I'm glad to be here laying it all out so that we can really understand what the heck we're talking about here.
It's like you get to play both. You're like half guide and half student. I think that's how this whole world is of being like in the spirituality world. It's like you're always learning, and then you learn more, but then you realize as you learn more that there's still so much more to learn, and even reinforcing things that you already learned. You're like, oh, I needed to hear that again.
Well, and for me, it's like so much easier for me to just share it with somebody else and to like clearly state something to somebody else is so clearly, so eloquently, like it makes so much sense when I'm talking to someone else. But then with my own self, I'm like in my head, I'm like, what? Like what is most going on? I forget everything.
It's the truest thing. I can empathize so much with that. Okay, so your higher self. Let's talk about what the heck that means. So to me, the way that I've understood it, the way I've studied it, and the way my guides have explained it to me, I feel like it is who. Okay, so let's back up a second. Your intuition is the channel in which your higher self communicates through you. So intuition is, we usually refer to it like, oh, my intuition says this. It's like, well, that's the channel. That's like the cell phone. That's the pager or the email device. But like, who's
Pager?
Yeah, the millennials will know that one. I'm showing my age. But anyway, yeah, so it's who is using that channel to communicate through you. Most of the time, I feel like it's your higher self. And your higher self, in the way that I understand it, is it's the version of you that has seen all the different timelines, all the good and bad timelines of your life as who you are. So me, for example, Gina, my higher self is the Gina who understands every single timeline, good and bad, of my character that I am playing. So it's like she's got the full encyclopedia of what it means had I made the decision to go left, right, up, or down every second of my life. So she's like the all-knowing version of me. And you can work with your higher self because they have all the answers, and that's usually like who's guiding you. So that it's, to me, the way I understand it is it's a subversion of like your soul. I'm getting really down a rabbit hole here. This could be a whole episode in of itself, but your soul is the version of you that is not just your character Gina, but all the different other like lifetimes that you've lived, and that's like in your soul knows all that information, whereas your higher self is like the rooted down one who's like got your character on lock, and then by working through with them, they give you the best answers because they know every scenario of the chessboard and how it could go. So that's why it helps to work with them. So that's my really heady response, but I'm sure, Lauren, you can add some more to that to really round out the rabbit hole I just took us on.
The Matrix. Basically, yes. We're in the Matrix. Okay, so before I met Gina, I did not think about it this way, but I actually agree with a lot of this. I think Gina talks a lot about like the game of your life and playing like a video game of in your life here in this lifetime, right? So your character, Lauren, my character, is moving through making choices every single day with free will, and I have the ability to choose if I'm gonna wake up and like do drugs and sit on my couch and like binge watch TV, or if I want to go like to a yoga class and eat healthy, right? Like I can make all these choices, and over the course of time, it's like a Sims game, right? You're picking and choosing, and you're creating your life, right?
Like a choose your own
Um,
adventure game.
Yes. Yeah. Which like makes sense. We know this. But the way that I've always thought about my higher self is like it's the part of me that's connected to something bigger. And I've gone in and out with like religion and spirituality my entire life. So I still don't quite know how to like verbally communicate this. And I think also just preface like this topic is really hard to verbally even communicate in general, right? A lot of it is just like a feeling, like you feel your higher self. So we may talk about this entire topic, like this whole episode, and it might like make zero sense, but we're gonna attempt. So for me, I view my higher self as this part of me that's connected to something bigger, to source energy, whether you call it God, the universe, whatever you call it.
Mhm.
Love, it can just be like the energetic frequency of love. For a lot of my life, I was like really anti using the word God. I just had like weird ties to it, and
I
that
think we
shifted
all
a
go
lot
through that
too.
phase.
Right? Like, yeah. So I feel like regardless of where you're at with like your religious beliefs, for those who are listening, this concept ties in because it's the part of you who is connected to that higher power, whatever you call it. And it's the part of you that's really here to, I kind of feel like it's the part of you that's here to like almost serve as your like mother and father figure in like a really divine, perfect
Mm,
way. Like
yeah.
it's like the protector, the guide, the nurturer, the one who like holds your hand when you're struggling and is like, you're gonna be okay, but it's also the
Mhm.
part of you that's like, get off your ass and like go do the thing that you're supposed to be doing. So it's almost like this kind of perfect parent figure that I view it as, of this part of me that's like, kind of at the end of my journey, like looking back at present me and like pulling me along. Like there's like a rope and she's like,
Yeah.
come on, like we're not staying here, we're like heading here. And it's being guided by like divine intention, divine connection. And that's where it's kind of bringing you into deeper and deeper connection with source. And in that, I would also say with yourself, right? Like it's the more I connect with myself, the more I connect with source, with God, with the universe. And my higher self is like the link between those things.
I love the way you're describing it because I feel like I gave a very like masculine response of like this is how my brain logically like structures it, where there's like all the timelines of me and then the higher self who knows it all, and you're over here like it's so like feeling it, like it's such a feminine, and I love it because it really rounds it out and like gives like kind of like a visual and then like an in your
Yeah.
body definition of what it is, because it really is a very heady thing. It's not an easy like definition to explain it.
Right.
There's a
But
lot there.
yeah, but like I was saying, like when we first met and you were sharing some of the stuff with me around your coaching program and how it's designed, and like that's what it's all about, like being in this game and being this like thinking of yourself almost like a video game character. It made me feel so much more like grounded and relaxed in the whole topic, because I was like, oh, like it doesn't have to be this super serious thing all the time.
Yeah.
So I really
Yeah.
appreciate your perspective on it too, because I feel like for me, I've always been so, it's this huge concept. It's like hard to wrap your head around sometimes. And I think,
Yeah.
having that like logical, more masculine viewpoint on it can help you sort of like make it more fun
Yeah.
and
And less
less
serious. Yeah.
serious. Yeah.
But both views are important, just like with anything. Duality, you need both sides
Yeah.
of it to like really get the whole roundabout thing, which is why we're doing this podcast together to begin with, because we both
Yeah.
bring a different flavor to these topics that round it out. I don't think it would be as effective if it was just me, and
Yeah.
I'd like to think that it wouldn't be as effective if you did it without me.
Yeah. 100%.
But anyway, so yeah, I think for me, I think just because my corporate experience in the corporate world is so like technology and computers, and that's what my background is, that's where my mind goes with things. And I'm a very visual person at the same time. So the way that I see working with your higher self is it's like this triangle where there's you and your consciousness of like who you are right now. So again, I'm going to go back to the character example of like me being Gina. So there's this version of me that is present and aware right now. talking for this podcast, that there's that version, and then I'm at the top of the triangle, and then on the bottom points of the triangle you have your ego on one side, and then you have your higher self, intuition, and like that line of communication on the other. And it's like you as this person going through life gets information from either your ego or your higher self through your intuitive channel. And so when it's your ego, this is like the thoughts that you have of like, am I talking too loud to the microphone right now? Like, can you hear me breathing? Is this awkward? Like, that's your ego. Or like, who are you to be doing this podcast, Gina? Like, what do you know about this stuff? Those are like your ego thoughts, those fear-based thoughts, or the random thoughts that you have and ideate on. But then there's your higher self, where like it kind of comes through as this like calm knowing and a direction of like, oh, I kind of feel like doing this today, that sounds really good to me, or I don't know where that thought just came from, but I need to go call this person. And you have two different lanes of channels that are coming through as you, who's the observer, as your character kind of interpreting those. And that's how I like to compartmentalize what's happening and kind of give it a visual and a logical way of understanding to help ground into it. I don't know what you think of that, Lauren.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think like seeing it that way makes so much sense. Having it like laid out and mapped out is so great. I was thinking of the book The Untethered Soul, where he talks about how you have that roommate in your head. Like it would be like if you had this like person that lives with you that's just talking at you all day long and like complaining about things, narrating things, like it's just constantly chattering at you. Yeah. And that's like the ego thoughts, right? Like that's the part of you. And sometimes, I mean, often it is fear-based thoughts, really. I mean, is it ever not?
I mean, I feel like the motivation behind it is backed by fear. So whether or not it's just straight up like fearful thoughts, I think you're narrating things in your head of like what you're going to say to your boss, or what you're going to say when you get to coffee with your friend. Like you're prepping because you want to be perceived in a way and where you're going to be accepted and ultimately like loved. So even though you're not having fearful thoughts when you're like, oh, what am I going to tell Lauren about when I meet up with her at coffee? Like it's rooted in, I want to make sure like I sound good and Lauren likes me and all the things.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think that's what it's like disguised in.
Yeah, because it's like, I mean, this just gets so deep right off the bat, but it's like, okay, so it's like either just love or fear.
I mean, that's the duality. I believe that for sure.
Right? Because even if it's like an ego-based thought of like, I don't know, I'm wearing this shirt today. Like, it's like, that's not a fearful thought, but it's like, you could go down the whole like line of tracking that, right? Of like, well, I wear this shirt from this store because I think this store, like I got this at Abercrombie, right? So it's like right away, it tells them like a picture. It's
people
like,
will love me because I shop at Abercrombie.
Means something to me, right? Like, yeah. And then it's like that whole, you can kind of track it back to think about, well, it's like, and this is in that book as well, like that ultimate question of, well, who am I? If you're just answering based on, well, I'm Lauren. Okay, cool. What does that mean? That's just a name. Like, who are you? And continuing to ask yourself that. And if you've never done that exercise, it's really powerful. You just literally ask the question, who am I? And respond. And you continue to ask the question over and over and over again and see how all these labels really mean nothing. Like it isn't you, right? Like you could always be someone's sister or daughter or whatever, but you just keep peeling it back, peeling it back, peeling it back. And then what you're left with is just awareness and consciousness. And that's you. So that's the top of the triangle we're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That awareness is there. And then you have your crazy roommate up here, and then your higher self intuition somewhere else, depending on
it's like the gut brain. Yeah. Yeah. Which, by the way, that book is the best. It is the top 2 for sure of best books I've ever read. And that was the first, I'll call it, quote, spirituality book that I have ever read. And it like broke my brain open and just changed the whole trajectory. So highly recommend that book for anyone that's listening, because it really it's so good.
I feel the same way. I think it broke my brain too. Like I just would read like 2 pages at a time and I'd be like, what?
Yeah. And just you have to like sit and let that marinate. And you're like, whoa. because you really do see life from a different perspective. Like it talks a lot about how you are the observer and you sit in your seat of self. And so that's one thing I like to teach in my program with my clients
Yeah.
is like, how do you like step back from life to like see it from your seat of self, that like you're just observing it, like you are
Yeah.
just, you're not even you, like it's like you're watching a video game kind of a thing, and like you just take it in. How do you
Yeah.
sit from your seat of self and just be aware of that you're conscious? It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's so heady, but like really cool, and something we don't typically do because we take everything so literal, and
Hmm.
we don't
Well, and
see
you're
that we're
so
in the
in it.
fishbowl.
We're
Yeah.
so enmeshed in it all day long. And that's where I think Glennon Doyle talked about this, where it's that dropping in feeling where, like, if you think about the ocean and you're like up with the waves and you're identifying as like being part of the ocean from the waves, like you're up at the surface and everything's like crashing and crazy and it ebbs and it flows, and you're like identifying with all of these crazy emotions and things and all this stuff, versus if you sink down and drop down, 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 down to like the center of the ocean, like the really still water. It's still the ocean, still the
Yeah.
same thing, right? But like you're experiencing it from this like deep rooted
Mm.
perspective, and you can like look up and see all the chaos. I mean, I don't know if you're like that, but you could see all the chaos at the surface and be like, oh, those are my thoughts, those are my emotions, right? Like
Mm.
that's the energy moving. And I just love that like visualization, because it's like, okay, so we're sinking in, there's the self, that's the part of me that doesn't really change, right? Like that's the part of me. I used to always think about it too with like higher self, of who is the part of me that was looking at myself in the mirror and has like seen my reflection in the mirror over the years, right? Because like
Yeah.
the me that looked at my like 5-year-old self in the mirror, I saw a way different reflection than the me that looks
Mm-hmm.
at my current self in the mirror. But it's like that part of me is the same, right?
Which, yeah, going back to
It's
what you were saying before, you can't say that your age is who you are, because
right.
your age changes, and then therefore your reflection changes in the mirror. So that's not you.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's that
Mhm.
awareness of, okay, I'm the one in here who's experiencing all of this. Like I'm
Yeah.
the ocean, I'm underneath the waves of all of this happening. And then your ego is usually the one up here, kind of like going through everything, whereas your higher self is more of that, like that guide that's like kind of showing you, okay, here's where we're going, here's the direction we're
Hmm.
heading, right?
Yeah. Yeah, many layers to it. I think that's why I like the video game analogy so much. It's like, okay, you are a soul in a body, you picked this character, now you're like, it's like the movie Jumanji, like you've dropped into like the earth, and you are wearing like this body, and you're moving around with it, and it's like it's not, you aren't like as in it as you think you are. And when you can see it kind of like a video game, you just see the room that you're sitting in right now, or like the road you're driving down if you're in your car, as just like, this is just where I'm at in the video game, and then my higher self is going to come in and like guide me like a little like tour guide, like just like the Jumanji movie, when they're like, go this way, go do that, and go see this guy, and he's gonna, give you this tool, you got to go take it over here, like that's like your higher self is like, all right, go do this today and do that tomorrow, because this is going to be good for you, I promise. It's just a
I
fun way to
love
live a
that.
life.
Yeah.
But I think for most of us who aren't totally into this world and see it that way, we mostly live in our ego, and we rely on listening to that voice in our head that's like, do I look okay in this shirt? Well, if I wear this shirt, people are going to like me better than if I were to wear that shirt. And that's, I think, where a lot of people are living from. And when you
Mhm.
can pivot and see it from your seat of self, everything changes, and it's the best. So I feel like so that book, The Untethered Soul, really is what kicked all of this off for me. And I actually found it in a bookstore, in a used bookstore that I walked into, and it was just kind of perusing, and that one stuck out for me. I feel like the universe like gifted it to me and was like, here. It was my higher self who was like, read this.
Mhm.
Let's talk.
Mhm.
But
Read this and then report
yeah.
back to me.
Then we'll talk. Yeah, yeah. So and that was back in 2016, I want to say. So I've been, for the most part, from a very infancy stage, and then it's now progressed over the years, working with my higher self. And as I continue to get on this rabbit hole, the way in which life functions and how I view it has changed so much. But how has your experience been with working with it versus before and you were just in your ego state?
That is a good question. I would say, I mean, I don't remember. It would be so interesting to see how like younger kids, like 8, 9, 10-year-old age, when they're a little bit older, would respond to this. Now I'm like really thinking about it because I have little kids. I don't remember really feeling my intuition or like thinking about my higher self until I was like maybe 13. What
Mm.
about you? Do you feel like you had like an awareness of it when you were younger? Or was it like
Well,
once you started exploring these concepts, then you started to become more aware of it?
gosh, I mean, I would say it was young, but I didn't know it was my higher self. It was more like, I mean, it was my rumbling with my intuition and the psychicness stuff that I was
Yeah,
experiencing of like, why am I hearing things inside my head that I didn't think? Like,
right.
it sounds like me, but what is that? Or just like knowing things that I didn't know. So it was like I was kind of understanding it, but I didn't have the
Yeah,
education behind it because I feel like your intuition and being psychic and all that, like it's the same. It's all like kind of one and the
totally.
same. It's just different levels of it. So yeah, I didn't really like understand
Yeah,
what was happening until being able to conceptualize it in the way that I do now.
having it kind of like labeled. Yeah, and I do think that even as I'm saying this, I'm like realizing what I would respond to someone like if it was one of my clients. Like I feel like as children, we're just like naturally following our higher self. Like it's not, there's
Yeah.
no disconnection, right? Because if we're looking at it from like love and fear, it's like we're born just in the love frequency and then we like get disconnected, and we start identifying over here. And that's where we're like
Yeah.
living so much in our society. And then we have these little moments where we remember love and we remember and we come back, right? But like most of us spend a majority, if not our whole lives, like we're disconnected and in this fear ego state. So I guess I answered my own question, but I think for
Mhm.
me, like I know I had like intuitive shits like when I was early on in my teenage years, and I remember thinking like, "What the fuck? Like, what is this? What is
What
going
is
on?"
happening?
Right. And I also had like no religious background at all as a child, so
Mm.
like I didn't even really like use the word God or anything. So I was just, it was like very startling to me. But, and I'm sure you can kind of relate from like the psychic perspective too, right? Like, what is this? But
Hmm.
I would say that it really always, like that connection always really guided me. And it felt like, it was always there when I really needed it. And I
Yeah.
went through a lot of trauma and a lot of stuff from like 13 to 17 or so. And those years, it was like, when I talk about like the perfect parent analogy, it's like, I feel like that part of me was the part of me that was like really looking out for myself, like helping me kind of push through and giving me this like whatever it was in the moment that I really needed. Like, I'm thinking
Yeah.
even at the time, like certain albums that came out that were just like exactly like the exact music that I needed to hear in order to like get myself through whatever I was struggling with. And, art that I would find or certain places I would like visit, on like family vacations and stuff. And it's like these little things that are just kind of like you said, they're like little seeds planted along that are sort of guiding you to the next thing. So it's always like a sense of really deeply rooted reassurance of like you're okay, like it was just this feeling and these reminders of like you're okay, you're okay. Like I remember one of my like mantras at a darker point in my life was like beauty is everywhere. And I would just like it would be like my higher self was almost like showing me these little things here and there where it would be this like, really dark, like grungy. I lived in the city for a long time, so it'd be like this dark, grungy alley, but then there'd be like a beautiful flower or something right in the middle, right? And I would like, I would like seek those things out, and then the part of me would just be like, see, like, I told you, right? Like, here it is, here it is. So I feel like it was a lot of that before I really knew
Mhm.
like any of this, the language around it. It was a lot of just experiencing like reassurance, safety, connection to beauty, connection to like divinity before I had the words around, well, like, what does all of this mean? And then started similar to you, started to find like literature and I got into yoga. So then just naturally with that, like started to notice more of my observing self and more of like, being kind of that observer of my experience. And I think slowly through that process, started to kind of figure it out a little bit more. And then now, to the point where it's like I have a clear distinction between, this is fear and this is higher
Mhm.
self and like whatever is in between. So yeah, I feel like, that's why I'm so thankful for like the authors and the teachers and the people out there who do this type of work, because it's like, you never know, just that one book, like you said, that's like going to completely change your perspective on everything, or hearing, one person talk about something that's just going to like pivot the way that you're looking at this stuff. So, um, I have like a long list of people that have helped me figure that stuff out, but Michael Singer is definitely on there. And then I'd say Gabby Bernstein too. Like and we got to see her a few months ago in real life, which was so
Yeah,
cool.
the
So,
coolest.
but her books, like really, I think just kind of,
Mm.
they took like all of my lived experience that I never knew how to talk about or how to like
Yeah.
structure, because it was always just a feeling. And it
Mhm.
helped me to like solidify that into words and into, concepts like highlight in my in my books and be like,
Yeah.
okay, this is what we're working with now.
Yeah, I think you've made some really good points. I think that's why we're all on this journey, right? Because we're all trying to make sense of like the genesis of what's coming from within, of like, oh, I have
Mm,
these thoughts and I have these feelings. And then a lot of us who get into this work are usually like heavy feelers. We're empaths, we feel deeply. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, how do I make sense of this? And so when you're listening to podcasts like this or reading books or doing coaching programs, it helps you to like see it in a more tangible way and
yeah,
break it down and go, oh, you can kind of look at it, it pulls it out outside of you, and you can be like, oh, and examine it. Like this is what it is. Got it. That makes sense. So yeah,
yeah,
those books are super helpful. But
for
you made a
sure.
point earlier that I want to highlight because I think it's really important. And I was talking about it in the way that I feel like I was guided to the book, The Untethered Soul, and you were talking about with like music or artwork or whatever that you were being guided towards. And I think it's important to note that when your higher self is talking to you, it's not necessarily they're just guiding you from within. It could happen in your exterior world as well, to where you
Yeah,
come across this book, or that flower in the alley that you were talking about is just glowing a little bit brighter than a normal flower would, and you catch it more and you look at it
yeah,
in that sense. And or that one song and the lyrics there just hit a little harder, that melody just speaks to your soul. It's things like that, like that's also your higher self. And so while it could
yeah,
be just this inner knowing, it could also be things outside of you.
yeah,
And I know you were talking a lot about how it was always guiding you to see the beauty, but I think for me, it has always been a radar for things that aren't safe for me. And I feel like
hmm,
that's where mine has always come into play, of like, okay, something's off with this person, or maybe they're not telling the full truth, or just things like that. It's kind of always guided me in this sense. I mean, good stuff too, but on the flip side of it, of like steering me away from things that aren't for me, and what things to kind of like watch out for with people, and just having those inner knowings. Did you
that's so
experience it too?
interesting. I mean, to an extent, I think that like I'm learning more and more now in the last few years. Like I think this lifetime for me was about like just kind of like getting in there and like getting beat up a little bit in some situations where it was like I feel like I had to kind of go through things that maybe I had like
Mm,
shied away from previously or like danced around previously, where it's almost like I kind of needed to lean into some stuff that like theoretically I would have thought my inner self or my intuition would have been like, no, girl, like
don't
let's
do that.
not do that. So, but like always in a really like safe and protected way though, which is so weird.
Mm,
Like I've thought about that a lot. Like I've had moments in my life where I look back at it and I'm like, wow, that was like really scary. And like I was not in a good space then, but like everything was like surprisingly completely fine. Like there
mm,
could have been so many bad things that could have happened in that scenario, but like I was super protected in that.
yeah.
And I don't know. So like maybe it has been in that way, but I just
Like,
haven't been like conscious of it at the time.
have you ever had a scenario where your intuition told you something, you didn't necessarily listen, you kind of brushed it off, and then after the fact, you were like, I knew I shouldn't have done that. And then I did it, and now I learned. I should have listened.
Yes. Yes, but that opens up a whole other thing because I feel like for me at least, like I don't view it as like right and wrong and your intuition's like do this or else. Like
I
you're gonna
don't see
pay
it that
for it
way.
later.
Yeah.
So it's like I kind of feel like even if I had had, and again, this is like me just like processing this question in real time, so bear with me, but it's like I kind of think that in those moments where I do have my ego self look back on something and be like, what the hell was I doing? Like that was crazy. I can also like in a dualistic way, right? Like stand in my present self and be like, well, I can see, or I at least can start to be open to seeing how that served me,
Totally.
right? But like I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's also times where it's just like direct in your face. Like, yeah, maybe this could have been way easier if you'd gone, like maybe the end result would be the same. Like you'd still learn the same
Yes.
lesson, right? But like maybe I could have shortened that timeline exponentially had
Yeah.
I, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the point you were trying to
Definitely.
make?
Yes and no. And so I think you bring up a good point because I could see where a lot of people's like minds would go in this direction. So I'm glad we're talking about it. I think for me, I see it in retrospect, not from the ego point of the triangle where I'm like beating myself up, like you knew and you should have listened. Like it's less that and more from like
I
the
love the
top of the
voice.
triangle.
You
That's my inner
dummy.
bully. What are you doing? No, but I see it more from the perspective of the observer on the top of the triangle going like, okay, higher self like told me to do this, but ego was like, nope, like we're gonna date this guy even though we know it's a
Mm-hmm.
bad idea. But I think if you are drawn towards something and you end up doing that and not listening to the guidance of your higher self, it's like it's because you needed that to be able to
Right.
learn and evolve and elevate. And so it's not like after the fact, it's like ego, what are you doing? Why did you do that? Like you made a mistake. I
Right.
think no matter what, you end up in the same place eventually. It's just like, did you need to go the longer route to get there and go through this lesson and learn it this way? Or do you already have that in your knowledge base and like that wouldn't be you wouldn't be drawn to it if it wasn't aligned for you to learn the lesson. So if you go towards
Right.
something that like didn't go well and you're like, shoot, my higher self told me not to do that, it's like you still, because you were drawn to it, you needed to do it so you can elevate and learn that lesson, and then now hopefully you learned it and then you don't do it again. So I don't see it as like a bad thing, but I could
Yeah.
see how a lot of people would and could stick into the ego afterwards and be like beating yourself up, going,
Yeah.
why did I do that? I knew I can't trust myself and so on.
Totally, yeah, and that's a whole thing that
Yeah.
like I can't trust myself now because I've made, and that's something like I talked to some people about recently where they were struggling with like, I mean, I just got out of this awful relationship and like how could I trust myself again to get back out there and date when
Hmm.
and there's validity to that too, right? Because it's like, okay, cool. Have you worked through the mindset? Have you worked through the limiting beliefs, like the physical somatic experience that you're having, right? Like you're all of that. Have you worked through it? But it's also like knowing that it doesn't mean you can't no longer trust your higher self, right?
Hmm.
I think that's something a lot of us are like working through or have worked through is like how to cultivate that trust, which
Yeah.
is like not necessarily the easiest thing. But I think there are lots of times where what I typically will tell people in that way is it's like a small things every day, right? It's like a muscle that you need to train. So
Hmm.
it's starting with something small. Like if you go to the store and you're like, what do I want to eat for lunch? And you can like ask your intuition to like guide you to what you want to choose for lunch, right? It's like,
Hmm.
and not questioning it, just being like, cool, that's what I'm gonna have. And it's like a small little thing, but it just might be enough to like break the patterns that your brain kind of naturally goes to when we're making decisions, as far as it means like for taking care of yourself. And then you can start to apply it to like bigger and bigger things the more you build up that trust muscle.
Totally. Yeah. I, not even that long ago, just a few short years ago, was in a place where I I learned, oh, did I learn? And did I go, and it was more like, how did I miss this? It was like, I
Yeah.
didn't really hear my higher self guiding me one which way or the other, which I guess can go back to what you were saying earlier in that, like, you didn't necessarily hear it because you knew you needed it. And that now that's clicking and resonating for me that that's exactly what happened in this scenario. But after the fact and in trying to heal from this terrible breakup that just absolutely obliterated my heart, I had lost all trust for myself, and I had a really hard time thinking about if I was ready to date again and what that was going to look like, because I was like, I how did I miss all these red flags that ended me up in this, it put me in this position where I'm at
Mm-hmm.
now that I'm navigating. I don't want to ever go through that again. And so
Mm-hmm.
it really was to get out of that mentality and rebuild that trust back with myself, was what you were saying in the baby steps, and like just grounding into the data and learning that everything is data. Every experience that you have is just a piece of data. So going back to your example with like, what do I want to eat? It's like the way that that comes through when you're sitting in the grocery store going, okay, what am I picking to put in my cart right now? And listening to that, like, that's just a piece of data. How does it feel in your body? How did it come through? And just like not being so in the 3D and in the matrix, and stepping back and
Yeah.
tuning into your body, and then just keeping all the data, keeping all those bits together, and then you have them to draw upon of like, okay, that felt like this. Okay, what did this feel like? What if I say broccoli? How does my body
Yeah.
react versus ice cream, and what does that feel like? And when you do it with such small things and then you start scaling it up to like, should I go on a date with this person or should I not? You can eventually get there, but it starts small, and everything is
Yeah.
data.
Yeah. For sure. And I do think it's helpful to think about it from a sense too of like what you currently are incorporating in your life that's blocking you from your higher self. Because it's like, yes, you can be focusing on like little ways to build that muscle and to build that trust. And that's more of like the proactive, like I'm taking actions to
Yeah.
build this up. But then there can be like very big or small things that are in your day-to-day experience that are like actively disconnecting you from that part of yourself. And I think that's something that if you're not aware of it, it can end up really extending your timeline of like getting to where you're trying to go, right? Like for me, that was alcohol. Like
Mm.
when I would drink, it would completely, I mean, I would say 99% of the time disconnect me from my higher self. It felt like, it almost felt like I was just choosing to disconnect because I think at that time in my life when I mean, I've gone on and off with drinking a lot where I've known that it was a problem and I'm sober now. But most of the times when it was like a problem in my life, I had this part of me, my higher self, that was like, yo, like, what are we doing? Like, this isn't it. And choosing to like consume something that disconnected me from that voice allowed me to kind of turn in the other direction and just focus on all the bullshit that's going on here so that I
Mm-hmm.
could like quiet that part of me that knew it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't serving my highest purpose, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't have to like listen to her because she wasn't really popping up as often. I was just like quieting her, quieting her. And I think there are other ways that that comes up. Like it doesn't have to be substance abuse. It can be like a myriad of things, but it's like just think about the ways that
Social
we all keep
media.
ourselves. That's what I was going to say. Like the way we keep
That's
ourselves so
huge.
busy, like
Mm-hmm.
we're constantly just consuming data of other people's life and this like
Yeah.
fake reality that they're putting out there. And it's like, okay, cool. Like I'm taking up all of these other people's messages and energy and all of this stuff, right? But it's like, how do I actually feel in this moment? And where am I even located in this moment? Like I'm so,
Yeah.
you know,
Come
and I'm
back to your
such a
seat of
hands
self.
talker. So I'm sorry if I wasn't like them.
You're talking to an Italian. I'm with you. Like,
I'm like, but do you think it's like I have to sometimes like physically, it's like, well, where am I in this? And how have I like lost myself in this? So I think that's part of the conversation too, right? It's like, we talked about it from the sense of childhood to adulthood, and you get disconnected, and then you have to kind of like come back to remembering. And I think especially it's like, what are the things in our life that are actively disconnecting us from our higher self? Becoming
mm-hmm.
aware of those things, so then you can make more conscious choices of like, well, how am I choosing to, either keep these things or take these things out of my life, whatever that process looks like, while also then building back up the trust muscle of
Yep.
like baby steps, baby steps. I can't trust myself. I do trust that there's this part of me that's leading me, that's guiding me, that has my best interest in mind, right? That has the highest good for all. That's something that I
Yeah.
always am trying to remind myself of, is like, it's not just the highest good for me. It's like highest good of everybody
Mhm.
involved here, and kind of handing that over to God of like, I don't know this, but like you probably do. I hope so. I hope you do. Like, what do we need to
Because
think
if
about
you
here
don't,
for
we're
everyone
really
else?
screwed.
I, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, but
But
you make a good point. I think again we're hitting on the duality of things, except this time I went internal about like where you being guided and how can you take those baby steps, and then you brought up the good point of like the external of like in my external reality and what the world looks like in my day to day, how
hmm
can I clean that up to help
yeah,
me be more in line with where I'm being guided? That's going to help serve the inner voice of going within so I can be guided in both ways. But yeah, so when it comes to working with your higher self, I think what we're talking about now is kind of how you would go about that, and that you
hmm
are looking to your external world to say, what do I need to clean up? What's not in alignment that would prevent me from connecting in with where
hmm
it's going to guide me, that's for my highest good. And then like, are you setting enough time aside to go within and be with yourself, to even listen, that you're not distracted by all these external things that we were just talking about, whether it be social media or a partner that you're always with, or a friend that you're always with, the TV, binge watching on Netflix, all these things. It's so much easier now to get distracted, whereas I feel like when we were kids, you kind of sat in your room bored often, and maybe you had a
yeah,
stereo, but lucky if you had a TV in your room, and that was about it. So you can lay in your bed for hours with just your thoughts. So I think for our age group and above, it makes it a little bit easier because I think we've had more at bats of just
yeah.
kind of being alone with our own thoughts. Whereas like kids these days, I'm curious to see how it's going to go over time, where there's just so much around them and so many activities with being kept busy, and then social media and all that. It's like,
Yeah.
are they going to naturally be trained to tune in? Will they have the same experience that we had, where it was like we did feel guided towards these things and we
hmm
did hear our higher self? We didn't know what the heck it was, but that'll be really
hmm
interesting to see. But yeah, net, the way in which to communicate it is both like the duality of internal and external. What else do you
Yeah.
think?
Well, that made me think about a couple different areas, because I do hear what you're saying about, the way we were raised and having less access to technology and all of that. But I know for me, like even now, it's like it's so easy to lose sight of that with your day to day. Like there was one time
Mm-hmm.
in the last year where I stopped using Instagram for like maybe 6 weeks. I was like, I'm gonna just take like a good solid break from this. I like deleted the app from my phone. And I would notice myself when I was like standing in line at the grocery store, or like at a red light, or, all those little moments throughout your day where you're like not doing anything for a second.
Right.
My hand would like literally go like this on my phone, and like my thumb would just start moving like I was like trying to find
As
Instagram,
if it was in your hand.
as if it was like there. And I'm like, what is, like, it's like a magnet in my hand, just like coming up to my face, like wanting to see Instagram. And it's like, it's just so interesting, because I do think those are the moments where, like, I don't know about you, when you get like your most communication from your higher self, but I feel like
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's usually in those moments where you're like bored, right? Like where you
Mm-hmm.
have enough space when you're like on a walk, or you're in the
Yes.
shower, or right before bed, or right when you wake up, like right after you have a dream or something, right? Like your mind's kind of a blank slate. And so that's another piece to this, is it's like if you do feel like you need to strengthen your connection with your higher self and you don't know where to start, that's a really
Mm-hmm.
good way to start. It's just like kind of what we were saying before, the external stimulus, like eliminating as much of that as possible so that you can give yourself practice just being in these spaces of like nothingness, and notice what comes up.
Yeah, absolutely. The shower, I feel like, is the one that's going to make sense for everyone because it's the one place you literally can't take your phone unless you have like
I
some waterproof
mean,
case on
you
it.
kind of
But
can.
you
I do
could, but
sometimes, and I probably
what?
shouldn't, but yeah, I do sometimes, like for music mainly. I'm like
Okay,
listening to
that's
music,
fair.
I'll have it kind of like propped up, and I sometimes will look at it, but I'm not like scrolling. So
Oh my goodness. That's
so it's
hilarious.
okay.
But yeah, I know for me, my favorite place to have it come in is I'll go for drives, and I will
Hmm.
literally drive from like a loop of one highway to the next in my neighborhood for like 30 minutes and then eventually come back home because it's because when you're doing something where you can do it on autopilot, like driving, like how many times have you driven somewhere and then got to your destination and been like, I don't even remember driving here. Like, I don't know what I passed. Like, where did the
Yeah,
time go? So for me, that's my favorite way to just like disconnect from the world. It seems easier to me. I mean, I love meditation, but it's a quicker way for me to drop in, especially when I'm not so good about my meditation practice. It comes and goes for me. That's
me
like my
too.
easiest way to just if I get in the car and drive, it's like because I'm putting my body to work. You're still thinking a little bit, but you're in that muscle memory where those what's fired together and wired together can just do its thing,
Yeah,
and then it frees up that space. So I feel like for somebody who's looking to like get started in this, and the thought of meditation and sitting in silence feels like absolute torture. I think it's if you go for a walk or run, if
yeah,
that's your thing, or for me, I've been doing the same yoga class for I think 3 years now, and it's the same routine every time, which I like because then I can measure my progress. But I have it basically memorized now, so it's an hour of moving my body, and then I get the best downloads in yoga class.
hmm,
So it doesn't have to always be meditation. I think for some people that kind of puts them off because it's hard,
yeah,
or they think it's hard, and it kind of is until you get used to it. But so is anything.
right. Yeah,
So yeah, it's whatever you're into, whether it's painting, running, yoga, anything that you could do where your body's doing something and your mind can kind of check out, then
yeah,
that's the sweet spot. That's when it'll come in.
yeah. I agree. And I think also for me, what's helped is having like dedicated time every day, or at
Yeah.
least I try every day, where I'm just carving out like 5 or 10 minutes just to kind of sit. And it's like, I don't even like saying meditate because again, it's like they just like complete silence, like
Yeah.
home for five,
Blank,
10 minutes. And
nothing.
it's like,
Yes.
no, like I'm definitely still thinking about stuff, but it's more of this like devotional act of I'm coming into my space and I have like an altar space set up right over here, actually, right next to me. And it's like very intentional of little things that help me kind of connect to that part of myself, little like symbols or things that make me feel that instant connection. And it is a sensory experience, right? Like bringing things into your eyesight, smelling certain like candles or sage, having like music on in the background that kind of like brings you into that energy
Hmm.
and just like grounding into it for a few minutes, ideally before I start my day. I have toddlers, so like it's not always possible. A lot of times they're like, I wake up to them just like hovering over my body, like needing me. So it's not always possible, but I do think that like 5 minutes somewhere in your day, even if it's like you need a quick reset, and you could even kind of do this in your car to an extent, you can't completely sit still, but you can listen to some like calming music instead of like blasting Taylor Swift like I do all the time. So I feel like there are little moments that you can weave in, and the more you kind of practice that as well, the more you can start to kind of connect back into that part of you that's just, okay, here we are looking out,
Yeah.
right? Um, but yeah, it takes some consistency when you're first starting, because I think so often we're living from this like outside in perspective and seeing the world from the lens of, well, how does everybody else think? And how do I need to behave? And what am I
Yeah.
supposed to be doing based on how people are perceiving me? And shifting that is not an overnight thing. It can take, a lifetime or several.
Yeah. And I know for me, I've had certain habits and patterns and routines, so to speak, that have worked for a little while until they didn't work anymore. And then I switched it up and I did something different. So I
Yeah,
think sometimes
totally.
people are like, oh, I must have a morning routine or a night routine and it's got to look a certain way. And like for me, sometimes it's just, I'm a car sitter. So I will sit in a parking lot, even if it's 120 in Arizona, and I will just sit in my car for an extra like 20 minutes with my own thoughts. Like that is like my favorite meet. Mine's always in my car. I don't know. There's something about like the safe little bubble of my car that just feels so cozy. And I will sit in the garage for 30 minutes after I come home. Like, I'll eat my food in the car. I don't know. That's kind of my
Like I
place
live in my
for
car. I
me.
live in my car.
I have a house, I swear. Just there's something about the car that I don't know. I should start
Yeah.
keeping my oracle cards in the glove compartment.
You should. You need a car deck for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think some things that maybe touch on too quickly is like how you feel or how you can discern your higher self from like other parts of you. I know we've talked about, and I know this has come up for us as well as like our clients, the difference between, well, is it fear or is it my higher self? Is it anxiety or is it my higher self? And how to actually like feel the difference in the moment. Is that something you could touch on?
Yeah, I think this is I'm going to explain it, but it's something that isn't going to fully resonate until you start practicing with it and learning your
Hmm.
own sensory inputs from yourself. But I will explain it so that way you can keep that bookmarked for the next time that you anticipate it and have to go, okay, which was this? Because I think it's really personal for each person and how their body
Hmm.
communicates to them. But when it's your fear, it's usually going to last longer. It's going to um, it's that fight, of what you're going to say to your boss that you think about while you're trying to go to sleep for 30 minutes. Oh, I'm going to say this and then they're going to say that. Like that's definitely your ego. Your intuition comes in so much quicker when it's your higher self, and it kind of just like drops in as this really quick either like knowing or word or image. It could come through in a myriad of ways, but it is fleeting. And so if it's something that's sticking around for a while, it's probably your fear. So if you're nervous about something and it goes on for like 30 minutes or so, like that's your fear, versus if it's your intuition, it'll come in like a quick little like zing and then it's gone. So that's why you have to practice with it and practice recognizing it so you can catch it when it comes by quick. It's like something
Yeah.
like flying by. Like if you have to pick out the red car that's driving down the street, it's like they could go pretty fast, and the more practice you have picking it out of all the quickness in our life, whether it's internal thoughts or just external what's going on, it happens so quickly, so you got to be able to catch it,
Hmm.
and that's why it takes
Hmm.
practice.
Yeah.
Another thing is it's going to feel more like a download, like, oh, I had this thought, but I didn't quite think that. Like, where did that come from? It's going to feel like it kind of just drops in, versus when you're thinking of something, you're creating it from within you and it'll feel more like an upload. Um, but I know in
Ooh,
explaining these, it's kind
I
of like
like
an
that.
arbitrary thing. Yeah, I haven't heard that
Yeah.
one before.
No. I
Yeah.
mean, I've heard download, but not upload.
Yeah. Yeah, your thoughts and like what you're thinking about and all that, like they're created from within you, so you're
Yeah.
uploading it. Like it could be the way you're talking to your higher self, and so it kind of just drops in like a download when it's your higher self. So that can be very arbitrary if you've never experienced it before. You could be listening to this going, what the heck is she saying? I mean, I get it conceptually, but like what does that mean for me? And that's why I say it takes practice. And so one
Yeah.
thing that you can do is, like I said, go in the car like I like to do, and I will straight up just talk out loud with my higher self and process stuff out loud. I'm like, okay, I'm navigating this and I'm feeling really, upset about this, and I can't believe like this happened. And it's like as I'm saying that, I'm like waiting for the receiving message to come in of like, well, like, some kind of voice of reason that I didn't necessarily think will kind of just like drop in, and I'm like, yeah, I know they meant well, like kind of like that. And it's like, so I'll have this really weird one-sided conversation in my car when I'm driving of like, all right, I know I'm hearing this, but here's really how I feel about it. I know. So someone who was listening in the car ride would be like, who's she talking to? Just me and my higher self.
Okay, so action step is I need to like plant a bug in your car so that I can like watch you doing all of these things and listen to it
I
and
plan to
blackmail
record
you
it one
later.
day. I plan to record it one day because I think it would be helpful for somebody to see what I'm talking about, because it's kind of
Yeah.
confusing. And that's something that I want to give to those that participate in my group program where I teach this. I think if they could
Yeah.
see me, and then like I'll put like subtitles of like, here's like what I heard and what I'm responding to. So you can kind of see both sides, because obviously it's just
Right.
me talking. So yeah,
Right.
that's something
Oh,
I
that's a
plan
good
to do.
idea.
But
Yeah, I love that.
because I
Yeah,
think when you could see it,
similarly, yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say similarly, I do this often with writing. So I'm like a big
mhm.
journaler. I journal all day, every day, and I have like different journals for different things. But I will like journal from my higher self. So I'll like ask her questions. If I'm in a period of my life where I'm like going through a big transition or I'm really struggling with something, I'll like write from my perspective of my higher self to my present self, sometimes to like my past self. a really cool tool that you can use is the prompt of like, if you're at the very end of your life, you're like 90 or 100-year-old woman, and you're like, you've
Mm,
lived this fulfilling life, and you're like, your family and friends are surrounding you, and you're like on your last day here on earth, and you had to go to like this current version of you right now and give her the advice she needs. Like, what would you say? And just writing, like free writing what comes through. And it can be so beautiful because it's like, often those answers are just right beneath the surface of
mhm.
the chaos that's up here. Like all the thoughts of, what am I going to do? And what should I do here? And I'm stuck and I don't know, and all this stuff. And it's like, as soon as you just kind of ask, sometimes those answers can come through. And I think that's also important to remember too, is that like the answer might not come through right away. And
Yeah.
especially if you're newer to this, don't feel discouraged if you ask and you don't hear anything. You're like, oh, this is bullshit. Like, I can't talk to my higher self, because it doesn't always come through as a clear download. It's not always going to be like this voice that's like, Gina, like,
It's
do this
actually
thing,
never that voice
get this
ever.
sandwich, right? So, like, it might not even be words. It might not be a letter that you're able to like perfectly write out in your journal. It might be like a feeling. It might be, maybe you're just asking, like, hey, God, universe, whatever, like, please show me a sign that I'm on the right path here, or please send me
Mhm.
something to show me that I'm moving in the right direction, or
Yeah.
please, X, Y, and Z. And I think that for me has been one of the biggest shifts, because in the past I was so focused in this like controlling, I'm the one running the show here. So it's like, yeah, I believe in my higher self, but I'm still like controlling her. Like it was this weird dynamic of, like I always know what's going on, versus that surrendering of asking and kind of just like leaving it out there and
Yeah.
not needing to know the answer right away. Like it's okay. It'll come to me when it needs to. And I trust the timing in it. And I trust that I'll know it when it comes.
Yes. I think you're getting to a really good point here, in that when you're channeling, whether it's through writing, which is a good way to open your channel, or talking out loud is how I like to process, you are expelling energy. And so when you're navigating something that is activating your nervous system and you're feeling fear or anxiety, anger, whatever it is, that energy has to go somewhere, and it's going to be harder for your higher self, your intuition, to communicate with you if there's a lot of that inner roommate that's going on. And so if you can channel that out, speak it out, whether you're writing it or speaking it, get it out of you, so you're allowing that, you're cleaning that slate, you're cleaning that channel. Because if there's like this backup of like buildup of energy going on in your mind, of all this thinking and all this feeling, you've got to get it out of you to help clear
Yeah.
that channel. So just by doing those activities, you might not get the answer right away. It might come later, but you're at least cleaning out that channel so it can come through. And I think there's something so healing within that too, depending on, whatever you navigated as a child, to allow yourself to be heard and to feel heard. So to process through whatever it is that you're thinking, whether or not it's accurate and what your higher self would guide you to do, getting it out and being, saying exactly how you feel is cathartic. There's a
Yeah.
therapeuticness that comes with that when you're allowing yourself just to feel what it is that you're feeling, and not necessarily doing it to get an answer.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and it's like not expecting this like immediate
Mm-hmm.
return on it. It's more the overall journey, right? It's like that cliche saying, it's not about the destination, but the journey, right? It's like that whole process can be so healing in and of itself.
Yeah. And then I think another thing too, when we're navigating this, is when we're saying what's the difference between, is this my higher self or is this my ego? A lot of times we'll have the tendency to be like, oh, I should go do this. I should be doing that, or I shouldn't be doing this. And that is always 100% your ego, if you feel
Yeah.
like you should do something. And now there is a chance that what your ego is saying of what you should do is going to be in line with your higher self and what they would guide you to do. But that thought, or you saying out loud, if you're processing it or writing it, if the word should is in there, that is your ego 100%. So not to say that it's wrong, but like that line of communication is 100% your ego.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, because it's also like thinking about, well, where, like, what is the intention behind that should? Because even if it's in line, like, let's say for an example, like, you want to have your own business being a spiritual coach, and you feel like you should sign up for this certification program because you're like, oh, this thing sounds so cool. It's so aligned with my values. It'll help me get to this next step. It'll give me confidence, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yes, like it's in alignment. But the
Mm-hmm.
reasoning behind it, if you kind of dig through those layers, it's like, well, maybe I feel like I should do this because I don't feel good enough to do this on my own without a certification, or I don't feel ready to actually step into this next version of me. So I have to have this other thing to like distract me in the moment until I can get to where I'm going. Right. And it's like just kind of looking at where the thought and the
The
should is coming
motivation.
from. Right. Yeah, what's behind it? Is it really fear, or is it more from this like grounded sense of, certainty within and feeling like more motivated from that side?
Yeah, so you bring up a really good point with like always having to peel back the layers of where it's coming from, and I think that's why there's a whole industry around this, and why we all look for community and more books, and we get down this rabbit hole that we want more and more of it because it's not so cut and dry, and there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of dimension there where it's not just, oh yeah, I work with my intuition and now I know. It's like it takes time, and you have to massage it and peel back the layers, and it's nice to know other people who are going through it so you can hear how they're processing it, so then you can take that back to how you do it, and it's really this like complex thing, but it's exciting at the same time. And so I think that's why more and more people are being so drawn to this industry, and why we wanted to create this podcast, because like, I've been on this journey for a while, and there's still so much that I'm learning and tweaking to get in more connection and clear connection with my higher self. Like it's just a never
Yeah.
ending journey, and that's what makes it so cool, and why I think we need more things like this and more friends who are into
Yeah.
this and such, because and through experiencing it through other people's eyes, you get to learn as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think there's something to like always remind yourself, like, this is the human experience. Like, this is why we chose to be here at this time, is
Yep.
to work through this, right? And it's not like you are aiming for perfection here, where you're just always going to be following your intuition 100% of the time and just
Yeah.
like bing, bing, bing. Like, no, I just don't think that you would be here in this
Nope.
reality if that were the case, right? So it's something to just be aware of and to be checking in with yourself constantly, kind of evaluating where you are, how far you've come, like how you've grown in these areas, and continuing to look for proof outside of yourself that, like, yeah, you can trust yourself. And yes, you do have a higher self. And yes, it is guiding you and it is there. And you have like your fear based ego, and it's also there, and it's not bad, and it's not something we're trying to like work out of ourselves, right? It's part of us, and it serves a purpose, and it gives us that duality. So we'll have a lot more resources for you guys around this topic, obviously, as we go on, but for this episode specifically in our community. So as we mentioned in the last episode, we have a free community. It's at dearhigherself.me, and we will be using this space for you to connect with other people and then to engage with us after each episode. And we'll be posting more resources for you so you can dig a little bit deeper into these topics and ask questions or provide your own insight. So check us out there, and be sure to subscribe so that you can get notified when we have new episodes dropped, and any sort of updates that come along here in the near future as we continue to grow. And we're really excited to have you here along for the ride. So thank you for tuning in today. See you next
See you
time.
in the next one. Bye.